3, 2, 1. Good evening and welcome to the community plan area for the Isla Vista community plan area regarding the selection of retail cannabis storefront. I'm joined tonight by 3rd District Supervisor Joan Hartman, by Gina DePinto, Reese Elistad, and Stephen Yee from the County Executive Office, Jeff Wilson and Catherine Lair from the Planning and Development Department, and Johanna Hartley from the County Council's Office. Briefly, I'd like to explain what tonight is. It's an opportunity for you to learn about the application selection process, about the business and licensing process, an explanation of the planning and development requirements for site placement, an overview of the Isla Vista community plan area, and it's your opportunity to express your opinion or to ask questions, whether you are a potential vendor or a resident. It's equally important, I think, to talk about what tonight isn't. It is not the selection of a vendor. It is not the selection of a specific site. And it is not a final decision on the scoring sheets. The decision about scoring sheets will be made at the Board of Supervisors meeting on August the 18th. This is also not your only opportunity to express your opinion or to ask a question. During the month of July, you can email us at any time during that month, and stay connected at cannabis.countyofsb.org. And there will be additional board meetings prior to the final site selection. In front of you, and we'll see this several times tonight, are the listing of future community meetings. We're sorry that these are virtual, but I think everyone understands the necessity of that and the reason for these delays. These meetings were supposed to start back in March, but obviously all of our lives have changed to some degree. So we're all here tonight, again, to listen to your concerns and to your questions, and hopefully to provide you with some valuable information. And now I'd like to introduce 3rd District Supervisor Joan Hartman.
Thank you, Barney, and welcome everyone, and thank you for taking part in the Zoom meeting to discuss the process for assessing retail cannabis applications for Isla Vista. As you saw on that slide, Isla Vista is one of only 6 areas in the unincorporated county, and by far the most populous, where a cannabis retail store can be located. As many of you know, the Board of Supervisors was initially going to select among qualifying operators by lottery, basically at random. But largely because of Isla Vista community input, the board reconsidered and adopted a merit-based approach. The board gave direction to staff for a 2-stage process. The first was to identify qualifying operators based mostly on numeric criteria such as financials, for example. The second stage addresses more qualitative criteria, including, for example, an education plan that might address public health concerns, among others, and a community involvement plan that could address issues such as labor protection and proportionality, local ownership, community benefits to address gaps in community services, and this is broadly under the heading of community compatibility. The evaluation will not be done by board members, but I'm very eager to participate tonight to listen and learn about the nuts and bolts of the process for the county, for the applicants, and for the community members, and also learn and listen about suggestions and ideas that IV residents bring forward about community compatibility. So we have a lot to cover tonight. Thank you for your patience in helping us get started. And that's the end of my remarks, and back to Barney.
Sorry about that. Technical challenges. I would remind thank you, Supervisor Hartman. And I would remind everyone that at the bottom of your screen is the opportunity to ask questions during the presentation. It's our intention to wait until the end of the presentation to answer those, but if it's appropriate, we will. One question that did come up is whether this recording would be available at a future date, and the answer is yes, and we'll explain about that later. I would now like to introduce you to Stephen Yee from the County Executive Office, who will walk us through the application selection process and the business licensing process. Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. Malekian. Good evening, residents of Santa Barbara County. My name is Stephen Yee, and I'm a fiscal and policy analyst representing the county's executive office. I also serve as the coordinator of the county's cannabis business licensing function. The objectives of my presentation today are twofold. One, to provide an overview of the county's cannabis retail storefront selection process, and two, to detail the county's cannabis business license application submittal requirements and associated review process. The county's merit-based retail storefront selection process commences with an application that requires the following: an application deposit fee, all requirements as stated in the Business License Ordinance, Chapter 50, except for a live scan, a seller's permit, and an issued land use entitlement. A business operations proposal is required, and so is a neighborhood compatibility plan. Upon submittal of the application package, staff will perform the following initial reviews. The County Executive Office will review the application package and perform a review of overall completeness. The Planning and Development Department will perform a review to ensure that the proposed operation location is properly zoned. If any portion of the application is incomplete or the proposed location is not properly zoned, a notice of non-acceptance will be issued to the applicant and the application will not move forward for further processing. If the application is deemed complete and properly zoned, the application moves on to the next phase of review and scoring. This second phase consists of a review of the Chapter 50 requirements. This review is conducted by the business licensing team, and the resulting scores are assigned a 25% weighting factor. The second component of this phase is a review of the business operations proposal conducted by a third-party evaluator and is assigned a 75% weighting factor. Aggregate scores of 85% or higher move on to the next phase of review and scoring. Those applicants achieving a score of less than 85% are noticed, and they will not move forward in the selection process. And finally, phase 3 of the selection process consists of review, scoring, and forced ranking of applications by community plan area. This will be conducted by an internal selection committee on the following two components: the Chapter 50 requirements weighted at 10% and the neighborhood compatibility plan weighted at 90%. Applicants achieving the highest score in each community plan area will be allowed the opportunity to apply for a land use entitlement and must also submit a complete cannabis business license application. Next, I'd like to detail the cannabis business license application submittal and review processes so that the public has a thorough understanding of the rigorous requirements and review process that our board has adopted. At a high level, cannabis business licensing allows for an inquiry into the fitness of the proposed entity and all individuals associated with the business, including owners, managers, supervisors, and employees. A business license is required for any person or entity who intends to engage in a commercial cannabis operation in the county. A business license must be obtained prior to commencement of business. However, an exception has been made for those legal non-conforming cultivators who were operating under the state's medicinal laws prior to January of 2016. Further, any person or entity seeking or possessing a cannabis state license must obtain the corresponding county business license. Cannabis business licenses, once issued, are valid for a term of 1 year. A final, unappealable, approved and issued land use entitlement is required prior to issuance of the business license. For any changes in ownership greater than 10%, a new business license application must be submitted. And finally, cannabis business licenses, once issued, are non-transferable. For the Cannabis Business License Ordinance, a cannabis business licensing team has been assembled and consists of county departments and one outside agency that have been assigned review responsibilities relating to the review of submitted license applications. Those departments that make up the licensing team are as follows: the Agricultural Commissioner, the County Executive Office, County Fire, the Carpinteria-Summerlin Fire District, the Environmental Health Services, which is a division of the Public Health Department, the Planning and Development Department, the Sheriff's Office, Sustainability, which is a division of the Community Services Department, and the Treasurer Tax Collector. The application content that operators are required to submit and that which our licensing team reviews is as follows: background and contact information, which includes all applicant and agent names and contact information, the name and contact info for all business owners, managers, supervisors, employees, and persons having a 10% or more financial interest in the entity. A 24-hour contact name and phone number in case of any complaints that need addressing. Government issued ID for all owners, managers, supervisors, and employees to verify that all individuals meet the appropriate age requirements. And the entity name, address, and license numbers for all other commercial cannabis operations currently being operated or previously operated by the applicant. We also gathered the following information on the operation: a full description of the proposed activities and products, proposed hours of operations, the total number of employees, the physical address and assessor's parcel number, a property and premise diagram, and evidence of the authority to operate, which consists of either proof of ownership of the premises, or, if rented or leased, written permission from the property owner authorizing the tenant or lessee to conduct commercial cannabis activities at the site. And this authorization must be notarized. Additionally, applicants must provide the following state information: copies of the applicant's state licenses or applications, quantity and type of state licenses that will be required for the proposed operation location, a state seller's permit or evidence that the applicant has applied for one, and as previously mentioned, an issued land use entitlement is also required. As for business entity requirements, the applicant must provide the name and contact information for the business entity, the entity's legal status, and proof of registration with the California Secretary of State. Applicants are also required to submit other supporting documentation, such as a quality control plan. This plan must address procedures on how the applicant will comply with state standards for non-contamination. Additionally, applicants must also submit an inventory control plan to demonstrate the ability to track the location of all cannabis product and be able to reconcile inventories with the records in the track and trace database, which all operators must comply with. There are also requirements that must be met regarding the site security plans and background checks. The site security plan elements that applicants must address are as follows: a perimeter security system, including fencing, locks, and alarms, motion-activated perimeter exterior lighting, an alarm system maintained by a licensed company with central monitoring capabilities, and a video security system with 24-hour monitoring. Applicants must also identify limited access areas and associated protocols, as well as an employee training plan And lastly, applicants must identify professional security personnel, which is a requirement for all retail storefront licenses. Criminal background checks are required for any individual associated with the cannabis operation. All owners, managers, and supervisors are required to go through a live scan background check conducted by our sheriff's office that discloses no felony convictions. For employees, it is incumbent upon the business entity to perform background checks on all employees and to retain those results. For any individual that successfully passes the background check, the sheriff's office then provides an ID card that must be worn at all times when on site at the cannabis operation location. Again, per the business license ordinance, each department or agency of the licensing team is assigned specific review responsibilities for a given application. Generally, the licensing team reviews the license application and supporting documentation. They also visit the operation location to conduct site inspections. Once each department or agency approves of their review portion of the license review process, the county executive office may provide recommendation of license issuance to the treasurer tax collector's office. The treasurer tax collector then performs a review of the applicant's cannabis tax status, and if no delinquencies, may produce and issue the license. Again, once a license is issued, it is valid for 1 year. Per the business license ordinance, a licensed operator must submit a renewal application annually. The review of a renewal license application consists of the following reviews by the licensing team: a review of odor complaints and responses to those complaints in compliance with the county's zoning ordinance, a review of the renewal application and supporting documentation, and lastly, they'll conduct site inspections. In addition to the annual renewal requirement and the associated review process, the licensing team performs ongoing compliance checks throughout the term of the license to ensure compliance with the business licensing ordinance. The licensing team has established compliance check schedules to perform these mid-year visits. And finally, per the business license ordinance, county officials and staff may inspect the cannabis operations records, books, accounts, financial data, and any and all data relevant to its licensed activities for the purpose of conducting an audit or an examination. And with that, I'll turn the presentation back over to Mr. Malekian.
Thank you, Stephen. And I hope people found that informative. We do have a couple of questions, but I'm going to hold those until the end, as some of them may be answered during this process. I would now like to turn it over to Catherine Lair from the Planning and Development Department to talk to us about the permitting process and a review of the community plan area. Catherine?
Thank you, Mr. Malekian. Hello, my name is Catherine Lair. I'm a supervising planner in the cannabis section of the county's Planning and Development Department. So any future cannabis storefront retail business will need to obtain a land use entitlement through planning and development. The next few slides provide an overview of the permit process for any potential cannabis retail businesses, where these storefront retail locations could potentially be, and what happens after an applicant obtains a permit through the planning department. The county code defines cannabis storefront retail as the retail sale and delivery of cannabis or cannabis products to customers, and is often referred to as a storefront retailer. A cannabis storefront retailer is required to operate from a licensed premise, which is generally defined as a physical location from which cannabis activities are conducted. A storefront retailer may also conduct some of their sales by delivery. Land use planning or land use permitting is regulated by 3 separate ordinances for the inland, coastal, and Montecito areas of the county. Future cannabis business applications would be analyzed and processed through one of these ordinances. In the inland area, storefront cannabis retailers are allowed in most commercial zone districts, as well as in some manufacturing zone districts with the approval of a land use permit. Similarly, in certain mixed use zone district areas throughout the county, cannabis storefront retail businesses are also allowed with a conditional use permit. I'll provide an overview of the land use and the conditional use permit process in the next slide. In the coastal zone, storefront retail businesses are located in the coastal areas of the county and require a coastal development permit, and they're only allowed in commercial zone districts. Finally, in Montecito, the Land Use and Development Code does not allow cannabis storefront retail to be within that area. Although cannabis storefront retail businesses can be permitted in all of the aforementioned zone districts, there's other locational criteria that may limit the location of a storefront retailer. For example, a storefront retailer may not be located within 750 feet from schools providing instruction in kindergarten or any grade 1 through 12, daycare centers, or youth centers. We will provide a more detailed overview of the specific community plan area for Isla Vista and highlight the zone districts that could potentially allow for cannabis storefront retailers in future slides. As previously mentioned, any future cannabis retailer will need to obtain a land use, coastal development permit, or conditional use permit with the planning department. We'll now provide an overview of the land use permit and coastal development permit processes. An applicant is first required to meet the applicable requirements under the business license review process as Mr. After which, submit a land use application to planning and development. Staff then reviews the project for conformity with all applicable setbacks and parking, and also for cannabis-specific development standards. Certain applications will need to be reviewed by other county agencies, such as the fire department, environmental health services, and even potentially some external agencies like Caltrans. Once an application is deemed complete and all of the analysis is completed, the project is ready for a decision, and the planning department will notify all property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the subject property, as well as interested parties. The mailed notice will also include information on how to appeal a decision. Once the planning department makes a decision on a project, which can be either the approval or denial of an application, there's a 10-day appeal period for applicants and/or members of the public to appeal the department's decision. For projects requiring a land use or coastal development permit, the department's general goal is to make a decision within 3 to 6 months. So the permit for a conditional use, the permit process, for a conditional use permit is similar to what I just went over, except that a conditional use permit requires a public hearing, and the project must also meet additional findings that are focused on ensuring neighborhood compatibility of all of the proposed uses. As detailed in the slide, prior slide and this one, staff reviews applications for conformance with all applicable zone district requirements, development standards, and staff also obtains all required clearances from other agencies as applicable. When projects that require these conditional use permits are ready for public hearing, staff sends notices to all property owners and residences within 1,000 feet of the subject property, as well as the interested parties. Notices for conditional use permits include the date of the public hearing, and they also include information on how an applicant or a member of the public can file an appeal. For projects that require a conditional use permit, the department's general goal for making a decision is 6 to 9 months. If the planning department approves a project, applicants still must complete several post-approval requirements. For example, applicants will need to comply with all conditions of approval that are placed on these projects from all other county departments. and applicants must also obtain grading or building permits as applicable. Additionally, approved cannabis storefront retail businesses will also need to obtain a county business license from the county executive office as outlined earlier in this presentation. Now we'll take a look at the Isla Vista community plan area. So this map identifies potential sites that the cannabis retail operations could be located at. The green areas of the map are zone districts that allow cannabis storefront retail. Since this community is located within the coastal zone, these zone districts are commercial only. It is important to note that these areas only show the zone districts where future cannabis storefront retails could potentially be located. However, as we previously described, any future businesses would need to go through an appropriate county permit process before they were allowed to operate. There are certain areas that you see on this map outlined in blue, and these are sensitive receptors, which include schools, daycares, or youth centers, and they're surrounded by a red 750-foot buffer. These buffer areas show the location where no storefront retailers can occur. For example, even though the green zones in this area could potentially allow these businesses, because of the sensitive receptor buffer area, the applicant would not be able to obtain permits or operate in this area. Finally, additional information and map resources can be found at the county's cannabis webpage located at cannabis.countyofsb.org. Specifically, we want to point you in the direction of our interactive cannabis mapping program, where you can explore a more interactive version of the maps that you see up on your screen. And if I get the ability to share my screen, I can walk you guys through that process. Thank you. So if you you'll be brought to this page. This is the county's cannabis regulations and licensing homepage. There are two ways to access the interactive map. One is click on this link for our community engagement. The link will bring you to an overview of this process and provide you with a list of helpful links. Clicking on this link here will bring up the interactive map. This link next to it is a tip sheet for navigating the permitting map. So clicking on the interactive map, there are a list of layers and items in the top right corner. If you go to the far right, there are several bookmarked locations. All of these bookmarks show the 6 separate community areas. For tonight's, we're gonna look at Isla Vista, so I'll turn that one on. In addition to that, I'll click on this other tab called the layer list. The layers that I'm going to turn on are the 750-foot buffer for schools, daycares, and youth centers, as well as the parcels and zones allowing storefront retail. Having these layers allows me to look within the community plan and to identify what areas potentially could have cannabis storefront retail. So I'm going to click on one of these items. So this is a parcel denoted in green, which per our layers shows this is a zone district which may allow for storefront retailers. And when you click on this, this will provide some more information about the address as well as the parcel, as well as the zoning. In addition to this, we have linked a Google Maps link. So for those of you that may not be as familiar with this area, if you click on more information and you open this tab, it will take you to Google Maps and it can locate you. The parcel that I happened to click on tonight was for Domino's Pizza takeout and delivery. Feel free to use this map and navigate through and take a look at the Isla Vista community map and figure out where the retail. With that, I will turn it back over to Mr. Malekian.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for that informative presentation. We now have come to the part of the program for questions and answers. Several questions were posted in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, which I've tried to reply to. And I'm now going to start with turning it over to Reese Ellestad from the County Executive Office, who has collected some questions that were submitted in advance of this meeting. Reese?
Actually, Barney, it's Gina. I've got those.
Okay.
So in addition to the questions that we are answering on the screen, and hopefully everyone can see those, otherwise we can certainly repeat them. We also received some advanced questions and requests to speak. We'll do the questions first before we talk about those who are on the Zoom tonight in the webinar. So one of those questions was, is parking a requirement or at least a consideration in the business license process, permitting process, and or somewhere else in this process? And I believe planning and development is prepared to answer that.
Thank you, Gina. So parking requirements are not added as a part of the cannabis business license review process. However, they're addressed as part of the land use entitlement process through planning and development. Parking requirements are outlined in section 35.36.060 in our land use and development code. Those are for the inland areas. In the coastal area, it's identified in section 35107. And while there's no cannabis specific parking requirements, a cannabis storefront retailer would need to comply with retail establishment requirements. So in the inland and coastal areas, as a general rule, retail businesses must provide 1 parking space per 500 square feet of gross floor area. And in addition, and depending on the scope of the project, there can be additional requirements for handicap parking spaces.
Thank you, Catherine. Another one is, I wonder if planning and development could help folks understand the 750-foot perimeter around a school and what the ordinance states, or the code.
Just say.
So the 750-foot perimeter depicts the requirements in our county land use and development code, as well as our coastal zoning ordinance. And it states cannabis operations shall not be located within 750 feet from a school providing instructions in kindergarten or any grades 1 through 12, daycare or youth center. The distance specified in this section is the horizontal distance measured in a straight line from the property line on the lot of which the sensitive receptor, so that would be the school or youth center, is located, to the premise of the storefront retailer without regard to any intervening structures. So the maps and all the layers that are online and posted for the community is for informational purposes, as it only relates to our planning and development requirements. Please note this does not fully encompass any other state or other legislative requirements. This is focused on the county's ordinance and what planning staff will be looking at to evaluate projects.
Catherine, we have a follow-up question, so if you could stay unmuted for a second. So Aaron is asking, are you saying each storefront retail will need to have 1 parking space per 500 square feet? I ask because that does not seem possible in Isla Vista.
That is correct. That's the way the code is written. And so once we receive an application for location in Isla Vista, our staff will be doing a deeper dive and work with the applicant to make sure that they meet our requirements.
And then we have another question. Are auto ingress and egress impacts and constraints considered along with parking considerations? That's kind of similar to what the previous questions.
All applications will be looked at in their entirety. So ingress and egress and how people are getting into and out of these buildings, as well as these parking areas, will be considered in our review.
Thank you, Catherine. Before we've got two that are very related and they're probably lengthy to answer. So before I read those, I just want to say to everyone listening, we did have a couple of requests to speak that came in advance. I do not see those names or recognize phone numbers from what you submitted. So somehow I need you to identify yourself. And for everyone else, if you would like to ask a question or comment, hopefully you can use the raise your hand feature to let us know so that we can unmute you. If you can't figure out how to, because it sometimes is hiding, if you can't find the raise your hand feature, you can also send a message to me as the host, Gina DePinto as the host in the chat, or certainly you could also post it in the questions and then I can find you and unmute you. So while you're possibly working on that, we have two questions. What are the criteria used for the merit-based scoring system? And somewhat related is, how does the scoring work? Was that Stephen? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Yes, let's see. So the criteria used according to Chapter 50 in its Section 50-7 of the Business License Ordinance, it details the business operations proposal. So the business operations proposal will be evaluated based on the following criteria. Number one, experience owning or operating a cannabis-related business. And that's a legal business. I just want to make that clarification. Record of cannabis operations in the county of Santa Barbara, in California, and in the United States. The next criteria is proof of corporate status from the California Secretary of State. The fourth criteria is step-by-step procedures to demonstrate compliance with state and local regulations for the proposed business, including cash management plan. Number five, a finance plan and pro forma financial statement, including projected revenues and expenses and proof and level of capitalization. Six, an employee training plan, a product procurement and delivery plan, communications/marketing strategic plan that demonstrates compliance with state and local regulations, local employment goals and supply chain support plan, labor protections for retailers with more than 15 employees, and lastly, any other information determined by the CEO to be necessary for the purpose of criteria-based selection. So that was the business operations proposal, and the neighborhood compatibility plan as it stands currently, and just be aware that the intent of this meeting is to gain input from the community to potentially add to this criteria. But as it stands currently, a site visit, customer and community education plan, community engagement and local involvement plan that addresses specific needs within the community hosting the cannabis storefront retail location. A neighborhood compatibility plan, including but not limited to interior and exterior design, odor control, on-site parking, compliance with community plan standards, and comprehensive plan standards. And lastly, any other information determined by the CEO to be necessary for the purpose of criteria-based selection, including but not limited to the list of priorities established above in the business operations proposal. To answer the question on how does the scoring work, so again, according to Chapter 50, the Business License Ordinance, and again, it's Section 50-7, accepted applications will be scored and ranked by community plan area based on the criteria established in that section 50-7, using the scoring sheet provided with the notice of criteria-based application. So the scoring, each accepted application will be scored based on the submittal elements listed in the score sheet. So points are going to be assigned to each submittal element. They'll be based on a minimum scale of 0 to 5 points, with 0 points being unacceptable and 5 points being excellent or exceptional. The scored submittal elements shall be weighted as follows. And again, I mentioned this in my presentation, but 25% based on the general application submittal required in subsection 50-7 D3, and 75% based on the business operations proposal required in subsection 50-7. Each accepted application must receive a score of 85% or higher, and that's really to move on to the next phase. Those achieving a score of less than 85% will not move forward in the process. So in no case will an application that receives less than 85% of the possible criteria-based points be placed on the preliminary ranked storefront retail list. So again, only those achieving 85% or higher would be considered.
Stephen, if I could.
Go ahead, Barney.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that very thorough presentation. But I did want to point out that after consultation with the county council, there were 2 slight modifications that were made to that score sheet. And I want to clarify it for the audience. One is that the requirement about a record of cannabis operations in the United States as a whole was eliminated. And so the experience criteria is section 3. And keep in mind, this is proposed. This sheet has to be approved by the Board of Supervisors, and that's one of the actions on August 18th. So this is all proposed material. But right now, item 3 is a record of cannabis operations within the county of Santa Barbara. And question 4 is general experience in retail cannabis operations, regardless of location. So I just wanted to clarify that one point, because one of the earlier questions was, is there credit for local experience? And we haven't made that adjustment. The other is that there are a couple of questions. Let me make sure I get the number right. 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of them were changed from the 1 to 5 to 1 or 5, as it was felt after talking with county council that they are yes or no questions. So that's just a point of clarification. But I just didn't want to have any confusion about that. Thanks, Stephen.
Gotcha. Thanks for that clarification, Mr. Malekian.
Thank you both. We have a couple more written questions in the Q&A, but we also have Melissa Cohen would like to speak. So there you go. Melissa, go ahead.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you so much. This has been such an informative meeting, and I really appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. So I am the general manager for the Isla Vista Food Co-op, and I also serve as a co-facilitator for our Isla Vista Community Network. This is a group of stakeholders that meet now weekly through COVID, but generally monthly in Isla Vista. This is a meeting that's been going on for over 20 years, and it's multi-stakeholder, nonprofit sector. There's county representation, university, businesses, all kinds. And so I wanted to ask a question relating to community, wanting to know if operators that have had a history of engagement in Isla Vista will be prioritized through the process. And just noting with that if there's an opportunity to have some of the criteria be evaluated, that having maybe a history of some engagement in Isla Vista could be something useful. Thank you.
Thank you,
So
Melissa.
if I could, as I mentioned, we are giving priority to people who have experience in the county. And and while it's not spelled out on the score sheet, I certainly think that someone who had experience of being engaged with the community in Isla Vista would certainly move up in consideration. But there is no specific extra points, if you will, for that.
Thank you for that. That's clarifying. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Melissa. Next, before we go back to written, we also have Liz. Liz, I'm unmuting you. You should see a prompt on your screen. There you go. You're ready to speak.
Thank you so much for your time. I kind of wanted to follow up on what the previous speaker said, and just mention, it's great that you're going to look at previous cannabis people in the county, but I also would just suggest that you look at not only county residents to keep that locally, but also that you consider, I mean, if you're giving people a heads up because they already have a cannabis business in the county, what about the small people who are trying to, you know, get through? Like maybe it would be better instead of having like a monopoly per se, or a certain place having a certain company having all of these stores, if it would could, if is like having a cannabis business in the county actually a positive prerequisite is my question.
I think that's
Thank
an
you.
excellent question and an excellent point. And certainly there's no question that there's a great deal of discussion about cannabis retail as sort of an entrepreneurial entrance or on-ramp, if you will. And we're very mindful of that. But that, I think you raise a good point. And I think it's something that we're gonna have to take a look at once we get some sense of just how many applications we get and from where.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. And now next, Lisa is asking, how will community input be collected and responded to in phase 3? And Jay is asking, I don't know if these are in the same answer, but how will neighborhood compatibility plans be scored?
And say the first one again, I might have missed that.
How will community input be collected and responded to?
2 ways, or actually probably 3. One is attendance and participation in the things that come up at these meetings. So for example, the previous question certainly raises a point that we're going to have to consider, particularly as it relates to Isla Vista. We're trying to, one of the reasons for having 6 distinct meetings is we recognize that there are undoubtedly 6 different sets of interest and criteria. And so we're going to try to respond to that. With regards to the second part of the question, or I'm sorry, so this attendance at these meetings, the follow-up questions and comments that will come from either people who have participated in this meeting or who watch the recording subsequently, and third, certainly the information that's brought forward at the board when the board is considering the score sheet. One of the primary purposes of this meeting is to help us sort of shape the score sheet to the degree that we can in the spirit of fairness to reflect the interests of each community plan area. I hope I answered the question.
And then just to add that someone had written into the question and answer just to recognize their comment that we should support our local operators. So
And we've noted that.
So at this point, I see no more open written questions. There's nothing in the chat. No more hands. Oh, thank you, Tiffany. Another one just came in, which is, would the county consider awarding extra points for actual residents of the community plan area for the license being sought?
I think the answer is yes. We would consider it in terms of total weight, but I think one of the things that's we want to be sure of is that we really want these outlets to succeed. And it's one of the reasons that there is an emphasis on experience. And we did try to narrow it down in response to an earlier question. It's one of the reasons that we took, there were 2 specific questions about, there were points for having experience in California and points for having experience in the United States. And we took that out, trying again to put some extra emphasis on local. But I think, again, if all things were equal, I think that somebody who lived or worked or had experience in each of the community plan areas would certainly be given extra consideration. I'm not sure whether we would want to formally put that down as a separate scoring sheet or a separate scoring factor.
In addition, another question is, has the county considered implementing any kind of social equity component?
The answer is a categorical yes. And while it's not spelled out on that application, I can assure you from the team's commitment, from my personal commitment, and certainly from the Board of Supervisors. Again, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we recognize that these outlets are entrepreneurial on-ramps, and we want to make sure that that they have maximum impact, not just in terms of succeeding as a cannabis operator.
Thank you, Barney. And with that, going once, going twice, I see no more hands are raised. I still don't recognize names or phone numbers from the advance requests. And it looks like everything that has come in on Q&A, I believe has been answered. And the only thing that is outstanding is Mary Jo, you've been asking about or commenting about ORCUT. And I see that you lowered your hand, so maybe we'll take care of that in the ORCUT meeting. And so before we sign off and thank everyone and let Barney go to closing comments, there's another question that has come in. So Mary Jo, I'm trying to figure out your question. So there are 2 schools, 900 feet. So say there are 2 schools, 900 feet, it would be okay, question mark.
Again, I'll look to Catherine to clarify. There are a number of factors, and that would certainly, be one of them, where something might be technically correct. I mean, it might be technically permissible, but it would certainly be something that the scoring committee would look at in terms of deciding which operator to advance to the Board of Supervisors. And Catherine, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Malakian. Well said. For the planning and development process, and when we're looking at permits, we have a list of ordinance regulations that we need to ensure that the project is compliant with. As noted earlier, we have that 750-foot buffer from all sensitive receptors. Technically, if somebody for a permit to operate a business that's located over 900 feet away from a sensitive receptor, it would meet. There is another component to this process through the CEO's office, the scorecard, and the business license review, which means that wouldn't necessarily happen just because it is allowed by the zone district and the locational criteria.
Thank you. Stay on, Catherine, because we've got 2 more. I believe you might be the one to answer. So Brandon is asking, is it 1 application per APN or site? Or maybe this is Barney and Stephen. And then in addition, sorry, questions are coming in and I just lost what I was reading. Let's answer that one first. And also, Catherine, if you are speaking, someone did comment and we are experiencing that for some reason we lose your voice. You are fading in and out, so I'm not quite sure about your microphone. But who is going to take the question about, and so Brandon, where did your question? Oh, 1 application per APN or site. Let's take that one.
This is Barney. I'll try that one, and again look to Catherine. I know the city of Santa Barbara dealt with this issue about multiple applications, multiple sites requested inside, and that's in their case in the city. In this case, we haven't formally answered that, but I would not be particularly in favor of somebody submitting multiple applications for the community plan area, but that is an issue we're going to have to address, and I don't have a clear answer tonight.
And then is there a timeline for when applications will be accepted and then graded?
Yes, and I think Stephen has that information.
Yes, so we've, so in terms of the timeline, we have assembled a projected timeline, and the disclaimer here is that the dates may be subject to change. So again, this is projected. Let's see. So roughly in September, approximately mid-September, we would be providing a notice of application availability and give applicants 30 days to assemble all the material and submit. So then that puts us at application submittal approximately mid-October. And it's going to be a 7 calendar day window where we will be accepting applications. Once the application submittal window closes, we would then be preparing to route those applications to the various teams. So the business licensing team, as well as the third-party evaluator. So I believe that answers that question.
Thank you, Stephen. And then Tiffany has two that go together. So will the scoring committee include members of the community, and how much discretion will the scoring committee have?
The scoring committee will have some broad discretion, but it will have to make a presentation to the board explaining that why a particular applicant was rated number one. The way the ordinance is rated, the applicant that is scored number one in each community plan area advances through the process. Other applicants are simply on hold while that applicant works their way through the process. At this time, we are trying to maximize our community input, but there is no plan to have community members on the scoring committee. There's a whole laundry list of reasons about that, and other areas that have tried that have ended up having no stores because of getting tied up in litigation. But I can assure everybody that's watching this that there will be a maximum amount of community input. And I already know from the number of people that have called both our office and the planning office that people are very attuned to who's interested and what sites are available. I hope that answers it.
Brandon is asking, do we know who will be the third-party evaluator?
We are in contract discussions with a company that has a great deal of retail cannabis experience and evaluating these applications, but no final decision's been made yet.
And then does the order of application submittal matter?
No, as long as you're in by whatever the deadline is we finally established. And there's a whole, if you look at the ordinance, I think Stephen mentioned it, there's a 30-day notice requirement before the application period can open. The application period is open for 7 days, and then it has a hard stop. And there will be a great deal of public outreach when we actually open the application period.
And then last, going back to Mary Jo, I think that she wasn't clear on the response about the 2 schools within 900 feet. Mary Jo, either please type maybe more specific, or I can ask you to unmute your microphone and you can speak. I'm signaling, oops, where did you go? There she is up at the top. Okay.
Hello.
You are now unmuted, Mary Jo. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is, when she was talking about the 750 feet versus like 900 feet, the part where it was most critical to understand what the devil in the details were, her voice wasn't there, so I didn't get to hear. Would that be legal then if it's a mere 200 feet difference in the amount of distance between, say, a dispensary and 2 schools?
Hi, thank you for clarifying. Hopefully you can hear me a little better. I'm going to move a little bit closer to my microphone on the laptop here. Our ordinance requires a 7.
Oh, you just lost out again, Catherine.
Um,
Do you want me to try?
Our ordinance requires the 750-foot buffer. So technically speaking, at 900 feet, it would meet the ordinance as written. However, as Mr. Malekian and Mr. Yee have described, there's an additional scoring component that happens through the business license. So while it may meet the code as required by planning and development, it does not necessarily guarantee that this project or application will move forward based on other neighborhood compatibility considerations. I hope that helps answer your question. I hope you're able to hear me this time.
Well, you did leave again a couple times, but I was able to glean more this time, so that's great. I just had one other question, if I can throw it out there.
Yes, absolutely.
There's going to be a dispensary in Old Orchid or just Orchid, the unincorporated Orchid?
So we're going to address the orchid-related issues
Right.
on July the 9th, and
Right.
we will show you the same map that we're
Mhm.
showing for Isla Vista.
Okay. Well, I was just curious because you had Old Orchid on there, and so now I'm confused. I'm thinking that one dispensary will be in Old Orchid somewhere, or my first impression is that somewhere in the unincorporated Orchid. But yes, I know it's July 9th, but I'm trying to we are trying to stay ahead of this. So we're trying to learn as much as possible so that we could be good stewards and citizens to
Yeah.
our area.
Again, I really appreciate that, and I would, as Ms. Lair pointed out, if you go on the cannabis-related website, you can find the orchid overlay, and
Okay.
you'll be able to see all the parcels that could be considered as a location. Doesn't mean they will be, but they could be considered.
Yeah, I saw that, and I just, because I was listening to you guys. But yeah, we will do that. Surely.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And then right now, the last question that we are showing is, will the final presentation on the scoring be public?
Yes, it'll be at a Board of Supervisors meeting.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for participating. That does wrap up our Q&A. I'll turn it over to Barney, and he'll also let you know how you can continue to ask questions, provide feedback, view this meeting, and all of that. So with that, I'm going to mute myself, Barney, and turn over.
Thank you. And again, thanks everybody. At our height, I think we had 55 people watching this, and that's very exciting for us. And congratulations, you were the first out of the box. And so we would like very much to get feedback about how we could improve this. We're going to do it 5 more times in each of the community plan areas. But in addition to that, on the screen in front of you shows different ways to get information, how to look at this video again, and the email that's at the bottom or the phone number that's at the bottom, you can use to call in with additional questions. And one of the things we're doing, there were a couple of questions about how are we collecting community input. As we get ready to go back to the board with the score sheet, we're keeping all the questions and comments from each community plan area so that we can see what themes emerge out of that. So we really are paying very close attention to your feedback and to what your concerns are. So I want to echo Gina, and on behalf of the county team, I really want to thank you for your time and look forward to talking with you again in the future. Good night, everyone, and be safe.
And before we wrap up, one more slide, Reese. Some additional contacts. And this PowerPoint deck is also linked in English and Spanish on the website. So you can still access this slide deck, plus it will be in video form. And also one last thing I want to add. Thank you to Carlos Saraceno, who has been interpreting this meeting in Spanish on the Spanish channel of this webinar. So with that, thank you everyone and have a good evening.